The envelope had been sitting in my coat pocket for 11 days before I opened it. My grandfather gave it to me at my cousin's engagement dinner, slid it across the table with both hands, the way he used to hand me my lunch money when I was 7. Everyone was laughing at something my uncle had said. No one noticed. No one except my aunt, who was sitting directly across from me, and whose eyes went very still the moment she saw it. "Don't open it here," my grandfather said quietly. He didn't look at me when he said it. He picked up his wine glass and turned back toward the conversation like nothing had happened. I tucked it into my coat pocket. My aunt's name is Patricia. She has been the kind of woman who runs every room she walks into for as long as I can remember. Not because she's loud, but because she makes you feel, without ever saying it directly, that your presence in the space is provisional, that you are a guest in whatever life she has decided to curate. My mother was her younger sister, and my mother died when I was 9, which meant that for most of my childhood, Patricia was the closest thing I had to a maternal figure. She reminded me of this regularly. My grandfather was my mother's father. He and Patricia had never been warm with each other. There was a whole history there I only understood in pieces. But after my mother passed, he made an effort. He came to Christmas. He attended school concerts. He was quiet and a bit formal, and he smelled like cedar and old books, and he always, without fail, called me by my full name, Margot. Not Margot. Not Honey. Margot. I am 31 years old, and I work as a registered nurse at a hospital in Ottawa. I have worked there for 6 years. I share an apartment with my partner, whose name is Daniel, and we have a cat named Fig, who is deeply unpleasant, but whom we both love without reservation. My life is ordinary in most of the ways that count, and I have worked very hard to make it feel that way, to make it feel chosen, not inherited. The envelope stayed in my coat pocket because I was afraid of what was inside it. That is the honest answer. I had seen the way Patricia's face went still, and I knew, without being able to explain why, that whatever was in that envelope was going to make something difficult. Daniel found it on a Sunday morning. He was hanging up my coat and it fell out, and he picked it up and said, "What's this?" "I don't know yet," I said. He set it on the kitchen counter and went back to making coffee. That is one of the things I love most about him. He knows when not to ask. I opened it standing at the counter in my socks with the coffee maker running. Inside was a single piece of paper folded in thirds and a small key. The key was brass, old, with a round bow and a tag attached with a thin piece of white string. Written on the tag in my grandfather's handwriting were 7 digits and the letters CIBC. The paper was a letter. It was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 4 months earlier. I won't reproduce all of it here. Some of it was personal. Things he wanted to say about my mother, about what he had always hoped for me, about the years he felt he hadn't been present enough, and the years he had tried to make up for it without ever saying so out loud. I cried in the kitchen while Daniel pretended not to notice from the living room couch. But the relevant part, the part that changed everything, was near the end. He had opened a savings account in my name in 1998. I was 4 years old. He had been contributing to it ever since. Not enormous amounts every month, but steadily, consistently for 27 years. He had also, sometime around 2001, purchased a small amount of stock in a few Canadian companies he believed in, some banks, some energy, a telecom. He had reinvested the dividends every year without touching the principal. He had never mentioned it to anyone. He wrote, "I did not tell Patricia because I knew she would find a way to make it hers. I did not tell you sooner because I wanted you to have it when you were old enough to know what to do with it. I think you are old enough now. The key is for the safety deposit box at the CIBC branch on Elgin Street. Everything you need is inside." I stood in my kitchen for a long time after I finished reading. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and said, "Daniel, I need to tell you something." I did not call Patricia. I want to be clear about that. I did not call anyone. I called the CIBC branch the next morning and made an appointment, and I took a half day from work on Tuesday and I went alone. The woman who helped me was the branch manager, a calm, efficient woman who asked for my ID and the key and cross-referenced everything against the account number on the tag. She typed something into her computer. Then she stopped typing. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She typed something else, slowly, like she was checking her own work. "Ms. Whitfield," she said, "I'd like to get one of our advisors to sit with us, if that's all right with you." I said that was fine. She made a phone call. I sat in a chair across from her desk and looked at a framed print on the wall of a canoe on a northern lake and thought about my grandfather's handwriting, how it had gotten smaller and more careful as he got older, how much effort those 2 pages must have taken him. The advisor came in. He shook my hand and sat down, and the branch manager turned her screen slightly toward him, and he looked at it for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, let's take a walk to the box first and make sure everything is accounted for." The safety deposit box contained 3 things: a sealed document envelope from a law firm in Toronto, a USB drive, and a handwritten index card that listed account numbers and corresponding institution names. 4 different accounts: 2 investment accounts, 1 savings account, and 1 holding account I didn't understand until the advisor explained what it was. By the time we were back at her desk and she had pulled up all 4 accounts and walked me through each balance, and the advisor had explained the dividend reinvestment history and what the portfolio had done over 23 years of compounding without interference, I had stopped being able to do the math in my head. "Can you just," I said, and stopped. "Total. What is the total?" She printed a single-page summary and slid it across the desk. I looked at it. I said, "I'm sorry, is this in Canadian dollars?" She said yes. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that too. I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not numb, exactly, more like the moment before a sound, that half-second of held breath. I thought about my grandfather handing me that envelope across the table with both hands. I thought about the way he had said, "Don't open it here." I thought about the look on Patricia's face. The total was just over $890,000. Not 12 million, not generational wealth of a dynasty money, but real money, significant money, the kind of money that changes the texture of a life. That means you can pay off a mortgage, or take a year off, or make different choices about where to work and why. I drove home very carefully. I did not post anything online. I did not call my aunt. I did not tell anyone except Daniel, who sat across from me at our kitchen table and listened to all of it and then said, very quietly, "Did she know?" I said I didn't think she'd known about all of it. I thought maybe she'd known something. The look on her face. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know yet, but I had the documents. I had the letter. I had 4 business days before the branch required my response on how to proceed with the accounts. I called the law firm in Toronto the next morning. The sealed envelope contained a copy of my grandfather's will, a new will, dated 8 months prior, and a cover letter from his estate lawyer explaining that I had been named the sole beneficiary of his estate, which included the accounts, his house in Kingston, and his personal effects. The will had been drawn up quietly, without the family's knowledge. The estate lawyer had been instructed to contact me directly upon my grandfather's death. My grandfather was still alive. He was 81 and living in a retirement residence in Kingston, and, according to the brief call I had with his doctor the following week after getting written authorization sorted, was in reasonable health for his age, cognitively sharp, had been asking to speak with me. I drove to Kingston on a Saturday. He was smaller than I remembered. That's what I thought when I walked into his room, that he had gotten smaller, not just older. He was sitting in a chair by the window in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, and he had a book open on his lap, and he looked up when I knocked on the open door, and his face did something complicated, and then settled into something that I can only describe as relief. "You went," he said. "I went," I said. I sat with him for 3 hours. We talked about my mother. We talked about the years after she died. He told me things I hadn't known. About the years he had tried to maintain a relationship with me through Patricia and the ways that had been made difficult and the things he had been told that he later realized weren't true. He was not angry when he said these things. He was tired and careful and choosing his words the way you do when you know you don't have unlimited time to spend on regret. He said, "I didn't want to make a fuss while I'm still here. I just wanted to make sure you had something of your own." I held his hand. He had my mother's hands, the same knuckles, the same way of holding still. I drove back to Ottawa. I made an appointment with a financial advisor of my own through the hospital's employee assistance program. I started the process of formally accepting the accounts and beginning probate paperwork for the estate, which I was told would be relevant eventually. I did not contact Patricia. She contacted me. It was a Wednesday evening about 3 weeks after my visit to the bank. I was on shift and I got a voicemail from an unknown number. She had called from her landline, which I hadn't had saved. Her voice was measured in the way it always was when she was performing calm. She said she had spoken to someone at the Kingston residence. She said she was concerned about my grandfather's well-being and his capacity to make sound decisions. She said she thought it would be good for the family to connect and make sure everyone was on the same page. She said she hoped I would call her back so we could talk before things got complicated. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I forwarded it to the estate lawyer in Toronto and asked for guidance. The lawyer called me the next day. She was not alarmed, but she was direct. She said this kind of contact was not uncommon in estate situations. She said the most important thing was that I not engage directly with Patricia in a way that could be characterized as negotiation. She said I should document everything. She said the will was airtight, prepared by 2 witnesses, filed correctly, reviewed by a second lawyer, and that challenges based on capacity would be difficult to sustain given my grandfather's medical records. She also said something that I have thought about many times since. Your grandfather planned this very carefully. He anticipated exactly this. You don't have to fight, you just have to let the process work. I did not call Patricia back. 2 days later, she called my grandfather directly. He told the resident staff he did not wish to take the call. A week after that, she showed up at the residence in person. I found this out from the staff coordinator, who called me because I had been listed as an emergency contact. She was turned away because my grandfather had added a visitor restriction to his file, something the lawyer had quietly arranged for him after our visit. The next thing I received was a letter, through a lawyer Patricia had retained. It questioned my grandfather's testamentary capacity at the time the will was prepared and suggested that I had exercised undue influence over an elderly and vulnerable man. I read the letter sitting on my couch with Fig on my lap and Daniel reading over my shoulder, and I felt, surprisingly, not scared. I felt something more like clarity. Like the letter had given a name to something that had been shapeless for a long time. I had grown up watching Patricia manage the narrative of our family. Who was responsible for what? Who had made sacrifices? Who was owed consideration? She was very good at it. She had been doing it long enough that most of the family had forgotten they were living inside a story she had written. But I had the letter my grandfather wrote me. I had 2 pages of his handwriting, dated 4 months before the will, describing in plain language exactly why he had made the choices he made and exactly what he wanted for me. The estate lawyer filed it as supporting documentation along with a statement from the attending physician at the Kingston residence, confirming his cognitive clarity at the time of both the letter and the will signing. She filed a sworn statement from the will's 2 witnesses. She filed the correspondence history showing that Patricia had been denied contact by my grandfather's own instruction, not mine. The capacity challenge was dismissed. The undue influence claim was dismissed. The legal process moved forward. I did not attend the hearing. The lawyer said I didn't need to. I was at work when I got the email confirmation. I was doing a handoff at the end of a night shift, going over medication schedules, flagging 2 patients who needed close monitoring in the morning, the ordinary, absorbing work of a job I had chosen because I actually wanted it. I checked my phone in the locker room afterward and read the email and thought about my grandfather in his chair by the window in Kingston, with his book and his cardigan and his small, careful hands. I thought about the 7-year-old version of me taking lunch money from those hands. Patricia did not come to the family gathering that Christmas. I heard through my cousin that she had told people my grandfather had been manipulated, that the money had been taken from the family, that I was someone to be regarded with suspicion. Some people believed her. Some people are still somewhere in the middle, which I understand. I don't feel the need to manage it. My grandfather came to Christmas. The first time in several years. He sat next to me at the table and he ate 2 servings of my Aunt Linda's butter tart squares, and he fell asleep in the armchair after dinner with Fig, who normally hates everyone, curled up on his knee. I looked at them from across the room, old man and ugly cat both completely unbothered, and I thought about the 11 days that envelope sat in my coat pocket, about how afraid I had been of what was inside it, about how that fear had been exactly wrong. It hadn't been something difficult inside that envelope. It had been something my grandfather had carried alone for 27 years, waiting until he trusted me enough to put it down. I am paying off my student loans. I am looking at properties, nothing dramatic, a small place, maybe outside the city. I am still at the hospital, and I plan to stay, because it turns out that when you are not making decisions from scarcity, you find out fairly quickly what you actually want to keep. I called my grandfather last Sunday. He picked up on the second ring, which means he has figured out how to use the phone the residents gave him. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked about Fig. He asked about Daniel. He asked about a patient I had mentioned the last time we talked, an older man on my ward who reminded me a little of him, and whether he'd been discharged yet. He had. He went home. My grandfather said, "Good, that's good." We were quiet for a moment, comfortable with it. Then he said, "You know, your mother would have liked Daniel very much." I said, "I know she would have." Outside the window of my apartment, the Ottawa winter was doing what it does. Gray and committed, and exactly itself. Daniel was making dinner. Fig was somewhere causing minor property damage. The ordinary world, running exactly as it should. I said goodnight to my grandfather and told him I'd come to Kingston in the spring when the drive was easier. He said he would hold me to that. I think about the 11 days that envelope sat in my coat pocket, and I'm still not sure what I was waiting for. Maybe I already knew. Somewhere underneath, the practical reasons I kept giving myself, that opening it would require something from me, not just legally, not just financially, something more like courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. My grandfather didn't leave me money because he had extra to spare. He left it because he had been paying attention for 27 years. He saw what Patricia was doing long before I had the words for it. And instead of confronting it directly, instead of creating conflict that would have put me in the middle as a child, he did something smarter. He built something solid and handed it to me when I was ready to hold it. That's not luck. That's a kind of integrity I find myself measuring myself against. Patricia had access to the same information, the same family history, the same understanding of what had happened after my mother died. She made different choices with it. I don't say that with anger anymore. I mostly say it as an observation. The choices we make when no one is watching, when there's no immediate consequence, when the only thing guiding us is what we actually believe we're entitled to, those choices accumulate. They become a pattern, and eventually the pattern becomes visible to everyone, whether we intended it to or not. That's not punishment, that's just how things work. What I kept coming back to in the weeks after everything settled was how much of what happened came down to not being rash. I could have opened that envelope immediately. I could have called Patricia the night I read the letter. I could have posted something online, told cousins, managed the narrative the way she had always managed ours. I didn't. Not because I was strategic exactly, more because I was afraid, and fear in this case turned out to be useful. It slowed me down long enough to think. The estate lawyer in Toronto told me my grandfather had planned everything carefully. What she meant was that he had thought it through, considered the variables, anticipated the objections, prepared the documentation. He was 81 years old, and he had done more clear-eyed thinking about this situation than most people half his age would bother with. I found that genuinely moving, not because it meant I was protected, though I was, but because it meant he had refused to give up. He had decided that clarity and precision in doing things correctly still mattered, even at the end, even when it would have been easier to let it go. I am trying to carry that forward, the idea that how you do things matters, that being honest, with lawyers, with family, with yourself about what you actually want, is not a disadvantage. that holding on through a difficult process without collapsing into bitterness is its own kind of strength, separate from outcome. Fig is asleep on my feet as I write this. Daniel is somewhere in the apartment. My grandfather is in Kingston and I am going in the spring. The ordinary world, holding.